Now we need to know what we're going to talk about. You're going to spend probably 30 or 40 hours with me, and we're going to discuss these topics. After you watch one of the topics, what I want you to do is I want you to go out there and dig deeper. I want you to go out there after we do the computer forensics introduction, and I want you to search and dig and find all of these places, all of these organizations like the IOCE and the SWGDE. Go out to those organizations and say, okay, well, what do they say about forensics, and what are the concepts? What is the forensics investigation process? Because right now, if you said, Dean, give me the steps for the investigation process, I go, well, Casey says this, and Carrier says this, and Don Murdoch says this, and Sands says that. They're all generally the same, but they all have a kind of a different path to get there. So you have to form your own opinion. You have to know what I think, and then take the other information and bring it all together. We're going to do searching and seizing. Now, when it comes to searching and seizing, we have to draw a line. And this line is, everything back here is criminal in nature. You have to deal with law enforcement. Everything up there, that's civil in nature. Now you have to deal with internal company and policy. It may be that you cross that line. And when you cross that line, things change radically. So searching and seizing is a big deal, and we have to decide how that's going to all fit together for us in the practice of forensics that we are doing. You may be working internally for an organization as a first responder. You may be working on a help desk and saying, okay, I want to be part of the first responder team. You have to respect the fact that in the searching and seizing that we do it this way because this is our policy and we have to follow that directive, and these forensics investigators will do blah, blah, blah. Then we're going to look at digital evidence. What constitutes digital evidence? How does it fit together? And how do we actually capture it? We start talking about that capturing process. Now, I added a lot more into the course on the first responders procedures because I talked to Don Murdoch, and he actually wrote the first responders course where he said, okay, corporations have incident handling within their organization. Usually that's called the help desk. And then forensics investigators, they have a different process. They're both on the same team. They're both dealing with the same computer, and they attack it from very different ends. So how do they interact and bring together? Then we'll talk about building a lab, what you should expect. When you walk into your first forensics lab and look around and go, yeah, that's supposed to be there, and that's supposed to be there, and this is the approving authority on this, and hey, has somebody approved our lab so that we can actually get lots of business? How do we build our lab? Now, I'm not going to give you exact specifications on that because they change so fast. Hard disk and file systems. How do we interact with the file systems? We're actually going to talk about how the platters are built, designed, and how we actually get the information off of that. And we also need to draw a line in the sand from the old thoughts of calculating how much disk drive space there is and the new thoughts that are out there, because that has caused some change over the recent past. And also dealing with hard drives like solid state, because we're seeing more and more solid state going all the way down to the consumer level. Then we're going to refocus for a second. We're going to say, okay, fine, we have all this evidence, this first responder, this forensics lab and stuff. What about Windows? How do we deal with Windows? Now, I'm going to try and focus most of my energy on current operating systems, but we do have to go back and do a little bit of a history lesson here. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk to you about one thing that you need as a forensics investigator, and I hope you're watching this video before the end of September. And here's why. Microsoft operating systems and studying those operating systems is a requirement of what you do. When you go and you grab evidence off the machine and say, here's a Windows 7 machine, Windows 7 Ultimate, okay, I know the evidence is there, and I want to prove that that evidence is there. Here's that registry setting off of that machine. That registry setting doesn't look anything like the registry setting for, say, a Windows Vista machine, or it doesn't look anything like an XP machine. And how do you know that? Well, what you need is you need reference systems that are not your evidence. You need to set up and install your own operating system so that you can test all these. Scientific theory and practice means that you actually test your thoughts and your theories validate those thoughts and theories, and then bring the evidence and match them up and say, my theory said this, I practiced and tested by developing and installing this operating system and replicating exactly what the assailant did on this computer. I did it over here on a reference system, and I saw when I did these actions, this was the result. And when I did these actions, it was an entirely different result. I see that by that, I can apply that logic to this system that's been muddied up by actually being worked on a regular basis. So how do you get the operating system that you need? Okay, here are the magic words that are only good until September. It's called TechNet. You can spend somewhere between $200 and $300 on purchasing a TechNet subscription, and what that will allow you to do is to have all of the operating systems and all of the applications from Microsoft all in one fell swoop. You get license keys with it. It's all perfectly valid. It's only for testing operations. It's only for designing your organization and setting it up. And that means that you can download all the ISOs and install them all in your virtual environment and set up that testing for yourself. After August, what happens? Well, Microsoft, after 15 years of dealing with TechNet, has said, we're retiring TechNet, and what we're saying to people is if they want that kind of quality and level of operating systems, they're going to have to move over to something called MSDN, which is more for developers. And in order to get the exact same thing that you now pay $200 to $300 for, after August, you're going to be paying, well, it could be anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 for that same privilege. You're going to need that as a forensics investigator to set up your lab to prove your theories. And you need to get a hold of those operating systems. Now, it's a lot easier when you switch over to the Linux operating system or to the Mac OS because you can download those for free as long as you can find the old archives of it. So what I say to you as a forensics expert, what you should be doing is you should be learning VMware, you should be learning about the cloud, and you should be building installs that are used to test everything. And you don't want to be building those installs on the fly. You want to pre-build them and get them all set up and make sure that you have the appropriate licensing. Now, if you can't afford either of those options, you can do what Microsoft calls the trial system. And what that means is that when you do the install, you've got 90 days before that install actually breaks. And there's plenty of TechNet left for that. But what I'll say to you, it's a real pain to get an operating system set up and running when the trial system could expire and you might not use it for 6 or 9 or 2 years from now. You'll have to do those reinstalls. So what I will say to you is realize that you're going to probably use some sort of answer file tool or something like that in the Microsoft operating systems so that you can get them right before they're ready to activate and then say, okay, for this trial I get it for 120 days. You're going to have to throw those machines away. Me, I have a reference library of built operating systems right now. The last thing that I just did is I actually just downloaded Windows 2012 R2 and Microsoft's 8.1 operating system that's out there for host. So I just downloaded those and I'm about to install them, but I have all the installs built for all of the versions of all of the operating systems prior to this, all the way back to Windows 3.11. I know nobody actually uses it, but I need to look at that and investigate that. So when it comes to Windows, you need to prep outside of class. Usually what happens is you as a forensics person who's new to this, somebody else will have that library and you'll share that library with them for this particular purpose. But if you're branching out on your own and you say, hey, I want to be a forensics investigator, you're going to need those operating systems. You're going to need a way to acquire those and build those up. We're also going to talk about data acquisition and duplication. How do we pluck the information off of the RAM? How do we pluck the information off of the hard drive? How do we do it on a solid state drive? What does data acquisition look like? And then how do we duplicate that in a way that is acceptable and reasonable for the court to make sure that we haven't changed it? That also gets into the authentication of this information that we're pulling off of that live system. Those live systems, you may have an adversarial issue where they want to delete the files. They hear you coming and you hear this is the police. Oh crap, I got to delete my files. Okay, come on in. You know, it's just like you see on the TV where the drug dealer runs into the bathroom and opens up the big bag of white powder and dumps it in the toilet and flushes it, and they go, oh, well, we've already turned off all the plumbing there. So how do we recover those deleted files? We can reach back into there in a lot of cases and actually pick up pieces of a file. It's kind of like picking through the trash, but you know what? It may be our best choice in a lot of cases. Then we're going to talk about two tools very briefly. We're going to talk about Access Data's FTK and EnCase by Guidance Software. Those are the two monsters. Those are the 800-pound gorillas, if you will, of forensics, and that's what most forensics analysts use when they're dealing with computer forensics. We got to switch over, and we got to also think about the adversarial portion of this. Remember, the question was asked, as a CHFI, how could I tell if a hacker got into my machine? What would it look like? What would the artifacts be? And some of those artifacts would be the fact that the adversary would try and hide information on that machine that has attacked it. And also, in a criminal activity, I also may want to hide my files from you, so I'll hide them in another file, and we'll do that in the steganography section. How do we use password crackers? Now you say, well, Dean, wait a minute. We're forensics investigators. Why do we care about password crackers? I'll tell you why. Because you are going to try and get onto a machine that I want to protect. So I'm going to go ahead and log out of the machine, and you've got to figure out how to crack into it. We're also going to get event information when we're talking about a large-scale enterprise of log correlation. We saw the firewall, it's got a firewall log. The intrusion detection, it's got a log on it. And this host over here has a log on it. Let's bring all those logs together and say, this was the activity from the start to the finish of this particular adversary. Then we're going to have to dig into a little bit of packet here and talk about network forensics. Now that works really well with a log correlation because we talked about the routers, the switches, and the firewalls and the intrusion detection systems. What kind of information can they give us back? You're probably not going to seize these items, but you're probably going to retrieve data from them that you're going to use.